A child born into royalty, yet raised in captivity, this paradox defined Zerubbabel's earliest years. But here's what nobody expected. While other princes learned statecraft in marble halls, he absorbed the bitter lessons of exile within Babylon's towering walls. The language of his captors filled his ears, yet his heart beat with the rhythm of Jerusalem's ancient songs, passed down through stories from elders who remembered what he had never seen. But there was something they didn't know about this boy. Zerubbabel carried within his veins the blood of King Jehoiachin, Judah's last legitimate ruler before Jerusalem's devastating fall. Though the world saw merely another displaced Jew among thousands, heaven recognized him as a crucial piece in an unfolding divine masterpiece. His very name, Seed of Babylon, seemed to mock his royal heritage, yet it would become prophetic of something far greater than earthly kingdoms. The question haunted him: would he ever see the homeland his elders described with tears in their eyes? In those formative years of displacement, God was quietly preparing a leader. Every story of Jerusalem's glory, every tear shed for the destroyed temple, every prayer offered toward the distant holy city was shaping a heart that would one day bridge the chasm between exile and restoration. The palace he never knew became less important than the purpose he was destined to fulfill. But first, an empire had to fall. Nobody saw it coming. Babylon's reign, seemingly eternal, crumbled like sand castles before the Persian tide. King Cyrus rose to power with a perspective radically different from his predecessors. He believed in restoring displaced peoples to their homelands. When his historic decree rang throughout the empire, granting Jews permission to return and rebuild their temple, it wasn't merely political policy, it was the hand of God moving through human authority. The call went forth, but calls require courage to answer. Among the thousands who could have stepped forward, God's finger pointed to. Who would you expect? Not the obvious choice. Among all the qualified candidates, all the experienced leaders, all the established figures, God chose Zerubbabel. Not because he was the most obvious choice, but because he was the prepared choice. His appointment as governor of Judah carried weight far beyond administrative duties. He was being entrusted with reviving a nation's soul, rekindling a people's faith, and reconstructing not just buildings but hope itself. But would he accept this impossible mission? Zerubbabel didn't seek this role, it found him. Like David being anointed from among sheep or Moses being called from a burning bush, this descendant of kings was chosen not for his credentials but for his character, forged in the furnace of exile. The man born far from the altar was now charged with raising it again, a divine irony that would become divine purpose. What he discovered on the journey home would test everything he believed. The caravan that departed Babylon carried more than possessions and people. It transported dreams deferred, hopes long buried, and faith stretched thin by decades of displacement. Zerubbabel led from the front, bearing the dual burden of governor and symbol. Behind him walked a complex community, young adults who knew only exile, middle-aged individuals torn between two worlds, and elderly survivors who carried Jerusalem's memory like sacred treasure. Each mile brought them closer to a truth that would shatter their expectations. The desert miles stretched endlessly, each step a small act of faith. This wasn't merely a geographical journey but a spiritual pilgrimage, moving from lament to hope, from memory to restoration, from what was to what could be again. Zerubbabel understood they were crossing more than terrain. They were crossing from one chapter of Israel's story to the next. But nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. When Jerusalem's broken silhouette finally appeared on the horizon, no amount of storytelling had prepared them for the reality. The city of their dreams lay in pieces. The walls that once protected now provided only painful reminders of vulnerability. The temple centerpiece of their faith existed only as rubble where glory once dwelt. The silence was deafening where praise had once echoed. Would this devastating sight crush their dreams before they could begin? Yet Zerubbabel saw beyond the devastation. Where others saw obstacles, he envisioned opportunities. Where others saw endings, he recognized beginnings. With wisdom born from exile's hard lessons, he began organizing not just reconstruction, but renewal. His first decision would shock everyone. In a decision that revealed both spiritual insight and practical wisdom, Zerubbabel's first priority wasn't walls or houses, it was the altar. Before addressing security or comfort, he understood that true restoration must begin with restored relationship to God. The altar's reconstruction became the foundation upon which everything else would stand. People questioned his priorities. With enemies surrounding them, with no walls for protection, with families needing shelter, why focus on worship first? This wasn't merely religious symbolism, it was profound theology in action. Zerubbabel grasped that without worship at the center, they would be building just another city, not the holy city. Without God's presence, their efforts would produce structures but not sanctuary, buildings but not blessing. And then, something miraculous happened. As flames once again flickered on the rebuilt altar, something stirred in the people's hearts that politics and planning could never achieve. The fire that had been extinguished in exile began burning again, warming souls that had grown cold in foreign lands. Around that altar, scattered people began becoming a nation again. But their greatest challenge was about to begin. The temple's reconstruction represented more than architecture. It embodied hope, taking tangible form. Under Zerubbabel's careful leadership, alongside High Priest Joshua, the massive undertaking began. Levites resumed their ancient roles, skilled craftsmen applied their trades, and resources from Babylon found sacred purpose. When the foundation stones finally settled into place, something extraordinary occurred that no one expected. The sound of hammers was joined by voices, but these weren't voices of celebration. Some were weeping, others shouting for joy. Elderly witnesses who remembered Solomon's original temple wept not from sorrow but from overwhelming gratitude. They understood the magnitude of what God was accomplishing through simple obedience. The younger generation couldn't understand why the elders were crying. Younger generations, seeing only the beginning, celebrated with unbridled joy. They didn't know what had been lost, but they could sense what was being gained. The mingling of tears and celebration created a symphony of restoration that echoed beyond Jerusalem's hills. God's people were rising from the ashes. Zerubbabel stood at the center of this emotional moment, feeling the weight of generational responsibility. He was the link between David's ancient promise and its contemporary fulfillment, between past glory and future hope. Each foundation stone represented not just building material but a declaration of faith in God's unwavering faithfulness. But success always attracts enemies. Progress inevitably attracts opposition, and Jerusalem's restoration triggered alarm among those who preferred the status quo of Israel's weakness. The resistance came not with obvious warfare, but through subtle infiltration. Enemies approached, offering help with hidden agendas. Their offer seemed too good to be true, and it was. Zerubbabel's response revealed mature spiritual discernment. When local adversaries proposed joining the construction project, he recognized the danger beneath their apparent cooperation. They didn't share Israel's covenant relationship with God, they wanted to dilute it. Sometimes saying no to seemingly good offers requires more courage than facing obvious enemies. His refusal would unleash a storm they never saw coming. The adversaries deployed political warfare, sending deceptive letters to Persian authorities, spreading lies about Jewish intentions, and successfully orchestrating an imperial decree that halted construction. Tools fell silent, stones remained stacked unused, and momentum collapsed into frustrating inactivity. Everything came to a crushing halt. For Zerubbabel, this forced pause brought crushing weight. Had he misunderstood God's call? Was his leadership inadequate? The people began focusing on personal concerns rather than corporate mission, and the unfinished temple stood as a monument to incomplete obedience. What happened next would test his faith to its limits. Years passed. The construction ban remained in effect, creating a painful gap between promise and fulfillment. The foundation stones, laid with such hope, gathered dust like forgotten dreams. Zerubbabel maintained his position and his faith, but privately wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. How long could he hold on to hope when everything seemed to be falling apart? During this season, the people adapted to interrupted purpose. They built personal homes, planted crops, established routines. Life continued, but without the unifying vision that had brought them home. The temple's incomplete state became a constant reminder of stalled progress, deferred hopes, and seemingly unanswered prayers. But in the invisible realm, something was stirring. Yet in the invisible realm, God was working. The forced delay wasn't divine abandonment, but divine preparation. Sometimes God's greatest work happens in waiting seasons, when faith deepens, not through visible success, but through persistent trust, despite apparent inactivity. Zerubbabel learned lessons during these years that success could never teach. He discovered that leadership sometimes means carrying burdens others don't see, maintaining hope when circumstances counsel despair, and trusting God's timing even when it contradicts human expectations. Then suddenly, after years of silence, everything changed. After years of silence, God's voice thundered through two unlikely messengers, prophets Haggai and Zechariah. Their words cut through the people's spiritual lethargy like lightning through storm clouds. What they said would shatter the comfortable status quo. Haggai's message was direct and convicting. Is it time for you to dwell in luxurious houses while God's house lies in ruins? His words exposed the comfortable complacency that had settled over Jerusalem. The people had adapted to incomplete obedience, focusing on personal prosperity while neglecting divine purpose. But Zechariah brought a message that would change everything. Zechariah brought a different but complementary word vision that transcended immediate circumstances. In a remarkable prophetic encounter, he saw a golden lampstand receiving oil directly from olive trees, accompanied by the unforgettable declaration, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts." These words revolutionized Zerubbabel's perspective. The obstacles that had seemed insurmountable, political opposition, resource limitations, popular discouragement, were no match for God's Spirit. What human strength couldn't accomplish, divine power would complete. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Zechariah delivered a specific word for Zerubbabel that changed everything. "Who are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you shall become a plain." The mountain of opposition, bureaucracy, and difficulty would be leveled by God's intervention. Could this impossible promise actually be true? More personally encouraging was the direct promise. "The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this temple. His hands shall also complete it." This wasn't wishful thinking or motivational speaking, it was prophetic certainty. God had predetermined the outcome. Zerubbabel's role was faithful participation in divine purpose. These prophetic words didn't immediately change external circumstances, but they transformed internal perspective. Zerubbabel now saw obstacles as opportunities for God to demonstrate his power, delays as preparation for greater blessing, and opposition as confirmation that the work mattered to both heaven and hell. The moment of truth was approaching. The political climate eventually shifted in Israel's favor. King Darius of Persia not only confirmed previous permissions, but provided additional resources for the temple's completion. The same opposition that had once halted progress now found itself powerless against divine timing and imperial favor. After years of waiting, Zerubbabel faced his greatest test. Could he finish what he started? Zerubbabel resumed construction with seasoned wisdom. No longer the enthusiastic novice who had begun the work, He now possessed the mature faith of one who had learned to trust God through seasons of both activity and waiting. The intervening years had refined his character and deepened his reliance on divine strength. The temple that emerged wasn't the most elaborate structure ever built, but it was consecrated, completed, and filled with God's presence. More importantly, it represented something greater than architecture. It embodied God's faithfulness to his promises, his people's perseverance through adversity, and his ability to accomplish his purposes despite human limitations. When the final stone was set in place, Zerubbabel experienced the profound satisfaction of completed obedience. The hands that had laid the foundation had indeed finished the work, exactly as God had promised through Zechariah. But his story was far from over. Zerubbabel's story extends far beyond temple reconstruction. Unknown to him at the time, his faithfulness was weaving him into history's greatest tapestry. Centuries later, when gospel writers traced Jesus Christ's genealogy, they included Zerubbabel's name among the ancestors of the Messiah. He had no idea he was building more than a temple, he was building a bridge to eternity. This connection isn't coincidental. The man who rebuilt the earthly temple became an ancestor of the one who would embody the ultimate temple, God dwelling among humanity. Zerubbabel's physical stones pointed prophetically to the living stone that would become the cornerstone of salvation. His legacy teaches timeless principles. That God often chooses unlikely people for essential purposes, that faithful obedience in difficult seasons is never insignificant, that divine timing differs from human expectations but is always perfect, and that temporary setbacks cannot derail eternal purposes. Today, whenever someone begins again after failure, perseveres through opposition, or trusts God's promises despite circumstances, they walk in the footsteps of Zerubbabel. His story continues echoing through every act of faithful obedience that contributes to God's greater purposes. But the ultimate revelation of his impact was still to come. Zerubbabel, whose name meant seed of Babylon, proved that God can plant his purposes in the most unlikely soil. Born in exile, shaped by hardship, tested by opposition, and refined through waiting, he became exactly what God needed for his unfolding plan. The temple he rebuilt stood for centuries as a testament to what happens when ordinary people respond extraordinarily to divine calling. But more significantly, his lineage extended to Jesus Christ, making his faithfulness part of humanity's redemption story. Every stone Zerubbabel placed, every obstacle he overcame, every day he persevered, contributed not just to Jerusalem's restoration, but to heaven's ultimate purpose. His life demonstrates that God's greatest works often begin with simple obedience in difficult circumstances, sustained by faith that sees beyond present limitations to eternal promises. The seed planted in Babylon's exile flowered into Jerusalem's restoration and ultimately bore fruit in the world's redemption. This is the power of faithful obedience. It plants seeds that grow into harvests we never imagined, blessing generations we'll never meet, accomplishing purposes we never fully understand. Zerubbabel's story isn't just ancient history, it's a continuing invitation to trust that our own acts of faithful obedience, however small they may seem, can become part of something eternal and magnificent in God's hands. What impossible dream is God calling you to pursue? What temple is waiting for your faithful hands to complete? Subscribe for more stories of the Bible.